to try and do within the confines of time that I have is to briefly summarize what is the critical or what is the main element of the current situation or objective condition at UCT. What basically characterizes our moment at UCT today, particularly as Black people. Here is my thesis on what is the main element of the current conjuncture at UCT. It is that the white figure at UCT, the white persona at UCT, which has always known, the white figure at UCT, which has always known itself to be the epitome of reason and rationality. This white figure, or this white subject, or this white persona, which has been the figure from which all authority emanates. It has been the figure which has always been responsible for identifying and correcting the deformities of Black people. This white figure that has been the source of all authority suddenly lost that position of privilege in 2015, 2016, or during Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall. So this figure, this white figure of authority, or that has known itself to be the source of all authority and reason, was somewhat displaced as a result of Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall. So what we see at present, which is the main element, as I've said, of the current conjuncture, is therefore an attempt at UCT. There is an attempt at UCT to re-establish the truth of white superiority, or to establish the truth of white dominance and Black damnation. Displaced for a while, immediately after Fees Must Fall, this white figure is on a counter-offensive today to re-establish its authority and superiority. Because it has always, remember, if you were here around 2015 or prior, you would have known the confidence of the white persona at UCT, whether it was a student or whether it was someone in management position. There was some confidence that white people moved with in this institution. And that confidence, which enabled a student to challenge a Black professor, that confidence of a white figure or white persona was displaced as a result of Fees Must Fall. And a few years down the line, that white figure is reasserting its authority. Suddenly, this figure found itself having to obey the authority of a Black female vice-chancellor. But since modernity, this white figure had known itself to be the authority. And so it found itself in a quagmire where now authority radiated from a Black female vice-chancellor towards itself. I'm sure no one here has heard what was the crime that Professor Pakeng committed. She stole not a single cent. She hired no relative of hers. So what was the crime? It was the fact that her presence in the position of authority reversed an age-old truth of authority radiating from the white figure to the Black subject. And over time, this became intolerable. But let us continue. So what I'm suggesting to you is that the major element of the current conjuncture, the major defining feature of the objective condition at UCT is the fact that you have an attempt to re-establish the authority of the white persona at UCT. Of course, in this scheme of things, there are other identities that are being used, but ultimately the project is white superiority. So, the point is that what we see at present at UCT, as I've said, is an attempt to re-establish the truth of white subjectivity, the truth of white dominance over black damnation. Now, I do not say domination deliberately. I do not think that what they are seeking is domination, but it is the damnation of everything black. So that once you have damned every black person, it is possible to re-establish the burden of whiteness, which has always been to take care of black people. So when you hear white people complain about everything else in this institution, they've developed a language, and I think Benata helped them develop the language. They've developed a language that since 2015, 2016, that has marked the end of standards at UCT. Since black people are now dominant, or rather not dominant, but since black people now occupy positions of authority. Now, what that does is that you have generalized. So there's no black person who stands a chance of succeeding there, because whether you're an individual black person, the statement is once black people get in, the standard degenerates. So it's no longer about an individual black person. So you're concerned about me, I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to try and do well. It's futile. Because the statement is once black people. You can't be an exception. So what has happened at UCT is the reassertion of this white subject, of this white superiority and this white dominance that is dependent on the damnation of all black people. Again, so that the point is not lost, what whiteness, of course, is capable of doing is to play a chess game where you see black people fighting against each other on the same basis, but actually they are doing the bidding for whiteness. And so whiteness does not have to always present itself as white people in front of us. Because it has the system, it has the structure. If you are looking for whiteness, do not look for it in person, look for its effects. If you are looking for a structural cause, don't look for it in person, but look for its effects. Because it exists only in its effects. So whether Thierry is charged by a black person and dismissed by a black person, as the investigation was conducted by a black person, if I remember well. But remember, the charge was that Thierry had said UCT is racist, but it is the black person who presides over his disciplinary hearing and decides that UCT is not racist. You see the irony?
Very ironical.
So do not look for whiteness in person, look for its effects if you want to find it. All structural causes do not exist in person. They only exist in their effects. So the point I'm making is that the present conjuncture at UCT, the major defining element of the present conjuncture at UCT is that there is a reassertion of the dominance of the white identity. And that reassertion is accompanied by the damnation of the black person. Of course, there are black people who try to present themselves before this white identity or this white persona and say, look at me, I mean, I'm good enough. Hoping that it will accept them. But so that we do not get derailed, I began in this way by talking about the current conjuncture at UCT in order to properly situate Dr. Thierry Chinyoka's unfair dismissal by this resurgent white persona or white subjectivity at UCT. So Comrade Thierry's dismissal, to be exact, is an integral part of this project to reassert the authority of the white subject at UCT. Which is to say, there is nothing legal about it. Those who have studied law are going to ask us, but what are the facts of the case? We want to suggest to them, even before they ask, that there is nothing legal about the case. There is nothing legal about the dismissal of Dr. Thierry Chinyoka. It is part of a broader political project to re-establish the truth of white superiority over the black colonized at UCT. And so, if then, Chair, the purported dismissal of Comrade Thierry is part of a political project to reassert the superiority of the white figure at UCT, it must also be seen in the same light with the removal of a black female vice chancellor, Professor Pakeng.
Yeah.
It is part,
Yeah.
or it must be seen, if it is a political act, it must be seen as part of that political project, which includes, amongst other things, the removal of a black female vice chancellor, Professor Pakeng. It is part of the removal and damnation of the black female chair of council, Ms. Babalwa Ngonyama. It must be seen in the same light with the resignation of 4 black female members of council, owing to a culture of masculine racism at council. If then Dr. Thierry's removal or dismissal or purported dismissal is part of a political project, the response to it must also be political. Yeah.
Come on.
Because if we dare make the same mistake we made when Professor Pakeng was removed, it is going to become a tradition at UCT that every 3-4 months we are going to mourn the loss of a black member of staff or a black member of, the student populace. This political project, by the way, do not think that you are immune from it, that it would never come closer to you. Your crime might just be that one day you were seen shaking hands and chatting happily with Dr. Lushaba. That's how malicious this re-emergent white identity is. It does not wait for you to plead your case, but as Hlumani said, once you feed the beast, it does not stop. Because part of this white superiority is based on the ability every time to celebrate its wit and its might, or its ability to dispense with black people at any given point in time. And so, dispensing with black people is actually a prop. It's an orthopedic support to this re-emergent white identity. It can't do without that dismissal or dispensing with black people. So as I've suggested, leading to the dismissal, or whatever they want to call it, of the black female vice chancellor, Professor Pakeng, 4 black female members of council resigned, complaining about the masculine character of council. Nothing happened. Because black people at UCT are many and dispensable. You would find another one, don't worry. Let these ones go. Because the trend is that black, particularly black female, people come to UCT to serve and they leave with their characters vandalized. It is for that reason that today, we must consider today as a moment when we reassert as black people at UCT our will to live as liberated human beings who are not readily available to this resurgent white identity or white character. To return to the point I was making, if then Comrade Thierry's dismissal is political, it must be seen in light of the other dismissals that have happened in the university. In the remaining minutes, Chair, I'm going to say a few words about Comrade Thierry Chinyoga's case, and then I'm going to close by answering the question Lenin left us long ago, which is what is to be done. So for those of you who do not know him, Dr. Thierry Chinyoga is a lecturer in mathematics. He's also a warden at College House in Kilindini. But most pertinently is that Comrade Thierry is a true Pan-Africanist who does not remember Pan-Africanism when there is a position to be secured. He's a true Pan-Africanist whose politics are underlined by selflessness, whose politics are devoid of opportunism. Comrade Thierry is a Pan-Africanist who's willing, or who has always, through his politics, not through the word of mouth, but through his actions, has demonstrated beyond doubt that he is willing to sacrifice himself for other black people. For him, Pan-Africanism is not to be deployed for enlightened, selfish individual interests. It was as such not difficult for us to decide to gather here today in solidarity with Dr. Thierry, because not by word of mouth, but through his exemplary actions, he said to us, our allies are not natural. He said to us, our allies are not biological. He says we shall not know our allies. They are not a function of geography, but rather, he said, through his actions, not the word of mouth, allies are forged and lost in the battle. Our true allies are not those who profess to be our allies. Our true allies, he said to us through his actions, are forged and lost in the battle. So Dr. Chinyoga said to us, through his exemplary revolutionary behavior, that if you are my comrade, we will meet on the other side of the battle. And so it is that we meet here today on the other side of the battle, still willing to fight on with Dr. Chinyoga on the same side. Because his actions, his revolutionary actions, were exemplary. It was not the words he uttered, but it was his acts that suggested to us that indeed he was a true Pan-Africanist. And so it is that we meet here today, as I've said, on the other side of the battle, still willing to fight on the same side with him. Dr. Thierry, I'm sure you'd be interested to know, was charged, the specificities of the case, it is that he was charged for claiming in his application letter for sabbatical that UCT is bedeviled by institutional racism and systematic exclusion of black people. That was his crime. It was to have stated in his letter, as I've said, applying for sabbatical, that UCT is riddled or bedeviled by institutional racism and systematic racism. That was the charge initially brought before him. And as I've said, a black person, the charge was brought by a white person, by the way. But then a black person was hired to do the investigation and to preside over the case. But something curious happened along the case, which is that his charge for this crime in 2022, suddenly he gets an amended charge sheet along the way. The amended charge sheet includes now an incident that happened in 2018. So suddenly you see a machinery at work, which says perhaps if we don't win on this particular charge, let us add yet another. And it goes into its files, this machinery, because it's always already waiting. It's building a file for that fateful day when it's going to charge the black people it doesn't like. Because how is it that it is 2022, suddenly it is able to retrieve an incident that happened in 2018? And if the incident was such a serious incident in 2018, why was there reluctance to charge him in 2018? It was because at that time, this white figure I spoke of was on the retreat. It is immediately after FISMA's fall, and so it knows very well that the political climate is not suitable. That is why we then must make sense of the current conjuncture in order for these developments to make sense. So as I said, curiously, an incident that happened, by the way, in the residences where Thierry functions as a warden. So there is something curious here. Initially, the charge of claiming that UCT is racist comes directly from his HOD in his academic department. But otherwise, when the charge sheet, the amended charge sheet comes, it is now integrative or incorporating developments in the residences. Now that tells you that this is a system whose eyes and ears are everywhere. But this system is not invincible because, as we can see, by 2018, it was unable to action its vendetta. Something stopped it in 2018 from giving effect to its vendetta. So this lady says they have a lecture here. Do you want me to stop? So, but it's not 2 o'clock yet, so you give us. So, as I've said, the case at present, Dr. Thierry Chinyoga's case at present is the CCMA. Because, of course, we do not have much time, what I'm going to then do from here, without elaborating the many inconsistencies in the case, there are many of them, I'm going to try and outline what is to be done. I suspect that we must tell to those who have ears to listen that we are not naive to think that the petition that we are going to sign in support of Dr. Thierry Chinyoga is going to stop them from their actions. But we do that as an affirmation of our being unto each other as black people. We are not doing it for them. We're doing it such that Dr. Chinyoga would know, even in these difficult times, that he is not alone.
That's solidarity.
It is our expression of solidarity with him. What has to be done in order to stop this white persona's advance, I suspect, is that we must consider today to be a start of a mobilization campaign that will culminate in a march of black people at UCT to present for consideration by the university a number of demands. And so we must here today agree that today we start a mobilization process that will culminate in a march of black people at UCT to present a list of demands to the university that we will demand they be responded to. Of course, those demands are going to have to be the demands of the people. And so we cannot prescribe them. But I suspect that there are a number of demands that are obvious enough that are somewhat a condition of possibility for us in this university as black people to breathe. And these demands, I suspect, will have to include, and as I've said, I'm not prescribing, but I suspect that these demands that we are going to present to the university at an appointed date must include, amongst other things, a demand that a fully fledged Department of Isixhosa be established in this university. Two, amongst other things, that list of demands, I suspect, will have to include an explanation from the university of what corrective measures has it taken against that white academic who insulted us, named Nicoli Nathras. Thus far, it seems that the disciplinary processes that affect black people move with speed.
Exactly.
Years ago, there's a white academic, a white settler academic here in this university named Nicoli Nathras, who insulted us. We do not know what has happened. So amongst other things, I think we must demand that the university must tell us what are the corrective measures that it has taken regarding that case, which is more than 3-4 years by now. But when it is a black person, the case is finalized within a short space of time. When it is a white person, nothing happens. Because if something had happened, we would have known. We all complained, we wrote letters, we wrote petitions, but nothing has happened. So I suspect that amongst other demands that we as black people must present to the university, we must demand from them an explanation as to what corrective measures were taken against that academic. Thirdly, and lastly, I suspect that amongst our demands, there would have to be a demand directed to the Minister of Higher Education to institute a panel to investigate the fitness of the present council to lead a process of change at the University of Cape Town. There are a number of reasons that make that demand legitimate. One, it is that unknown to you, and I can tell you again because I'm a member of that council, it is that an awkward situation happens at council. When the interests of white people are at stake, every rule is thrown out of the window. So you have the present acting Vice Chancellor, Professor Daya Reddy, whose brother-in-law is the registrar, Royston Pillay. That on its own is not a problem. What is a problem is that at the council meeting that decided to appoint Daya Reddy, Royston Pillay, who's Secretary of Council, is present. and participates in the discussion. And when, as it is expected, he must recuse himself from the meeting, there is a tradition at council. If you're recusing yourself from an item on the agenda, you log out of the system we use called convene. Royston Pillay did not step out. He did not log off. He said to council he's going to move away from his computer. In his own house. We can't see whether he's moved one step away from his computer or he's moved by, 1 inch of a rolling chair backwards. What I'm trying to point at is that all fiduciary responsibilities, when the interests of white people are at stake, are thrown out of the window. How does it become acceptable to a council that must ensure that all decisions of the university are above reproach? How does it happen that that council accepts an explanation from the registrar, who has declared that the person in question whose candidature is being discussed is his in-law, but says that he's not going to log off, he's going to move away from his computer in his own house? It is fairly evident from this council's nomination of 2 males to lead it. It is fairly obvious from this incident that I have just given you, but it is fairly obvious from the 6 members of the selection committee that we are going to get from council of the vice chancellor, selection committee members, who are going to conduct the interviews and appointment of the next vice chancellor. 6 of them, there is not going to be a single black female amongst them. Now, how is it that that's a council that can be entrusted with the responsibility of leading change in the university? There are several other malfeasances that I cannot, for reasons of time, tell you of in that council. But there is one that you must know, which is that Royston Pillay had resigned. I'm sure you all know that he had submitted a letter of resignation to council. So he's supposed to have left. Why is he still in the university? You know why? Because upon the appointment of his brother-in-law, council went to him and said that he must not resign, but it is going to give him what is called incentivized early retirement. When the CFO came to council and said, this university has a deficit of 284 million rands, where is that money going to come from? You know what was the answer? They said the vice chancellor has the discretionary budget. It will come from the vice chancellor. So where was it going to come from? From his brother-in-law. So these are the malfeasances in that council that when it is in their interest, do not appear in the newspapers. You hear everything else that happens at council, but they don't report these ones. Because the interests of white people are at stake. And so I suggest to us that we would have failed ourselves if we ended this gathering here today without committing to gathering again in order to consolidate a list of demands so that we may present them on an appointed date to the university. Thank you very much.
Comrades, before you leave, few announcements. Was sorry for the lecture was about to do her work, but we are in a political moment. In fact, we might not even have this lecture if we decide we are shutting down. So we are going to be making few announcements. We're taking all rounds. All shop stewards must meet outside. We must not forget about the struggle of workers. Yes, comrades. We hear rumors that the university is busy hiring people with agents. We are hearing rumors of ubuyela kundalasho reversing resources sithi noche impundu zelawa ezibenza. So comrades, we're going to announce very soon, we're going to gather, we're going to be mobilizing rest to rest, we're going to be circulating our posters. We are starting to fight today and it's not going to end nicely for the university.